Hello, so we are starting
All right, let's talk about heat loss. So newborns have very thin skin.
okay, so this is chapter 17. This is going to be newborn heat loss. I like how she sections it off like this.
And their blood vessels are very close to the surface of the skin. They lack the shivering ability, and they have limited stores of metabolic substrates such as like glucose, glycogen, and fat. So because they lack the ability to shiver effectively to increase heat production, this limits their ability to regulate their body temperature. Because they have limited use of voluntary muscle activity. Think of when you've been really cold, like standing outside in the snow or whatever. You have the ability to run in place or do jumping jacks to allow your body to create heat. This can be done by using your muscles, but newborns don't have this ability. Newborns have a very large body surface area in relation to their actual body weight. This makes it hard for them to warm up. Newborns lack subcutaneous fat. They have little ability to conserve heat by changing posture. An example of this would be how when we are cold, we can tuck ourselves into that fetal position, trying to conserve heat loss, but due to their lack of subcutaneous fat, newborns aren't able to do this. Newborns have no ability to adjust their own clothing or blankets to achieve warmth. They're not able to communicate. They're not able to roll around in bed and grab an extra blanket and throw on top of themselves to promote warmth or to ask for a sweater or warmer clothes. Newborns can't communicate if they're too warm or too hot. And something like this is important because they can get sick if they're too cold, but they can also get sick if they're too hot, right? The SIDS rate, sudden infant death syndrome, that rate increases a lot from overheating. Or that's a risk factor, I just say. Overheating is a risk factor for sudden infant death syndrome. This can be a cultural thing too. I went to nursing school in Arizona. I've lived in Arizona for a long time, and Hispanic culture is really big on hot and cold, and they're really big on bundling up their babies. So I got many a glare and an evil look, right? If I brought the baby to the ER and I started undressing the baby who had a fever, right? They did not like that. So it is important, even in the hospital, in labor and delivery, right, that we're going to bundle their babies up. It can be 118 degrees outside, but they're still going to have them nice and bundled with fleece pajamas and a hat and socks and, all sorts of things. So culturally, sometimes you have to decide when it's important to educate and when it's not, because the babies can't communicate if they're too hot. So we educate the family on what's appropriate and when to put on an extra layer on the baby or when to take an extra layer off. But sometimes it's just cultural, right? So in this case, it's important to educate the family, then document that you've educated them. You're not going to be able to change everyone's opinion, but it's just important that you do your best and you don't just let it slide and base it just off of culture, right? We still want to educate. There's about 4 different mechanisms of heat exchange. So conduction is the transfer of heat from one object to another when the two objects are in direct contact with each other. So an example of this is skin to skin, right? When two objects are there, the mom can transfer the heat to the baby. Another example would be like on an object, so like a cold scale. We're not going to put the baby right on the cold scale. We're either going to put a towel or a pillowcase or a Chex pad or some kind of barrier between a cold surface and the baby. We don't want to put the baby right on a cold surface. That would be conduction heat or cooling. Convection, this is the flow of heat from the body surface. I know there's pictures here, but conduction's on the surface. Convection, you can see it kind of breezing in. So convection is the flow of heat from a body surface to a cooler surrounding air or to air circulating over the body's surface. An example of convection would be the flow of heat from the body to a cooler surrounding surface, like a cool breeze or a draft that comes into a room over the newborn. You don't want to put the baby directly under an air vent for this reason. Evaporation is the loss of heat when a liquid is converted into a vapor. Example of evaporation would be when the newborns are covered in amniotic fluid. Think of when you're swimming in a swimming pool and you're comfortable underneath the water, but as soon as you get out of the water and that cool breeze hits you, you just get freezing, right? So this is why it's important that we dry newborns immediately after birth. This is part of when we talk about neonatal resuscitation. This is one of the first steps. This is the first step, is to dry, stimulate, and do your bulb suction, right? So like in CPR, we check airway, breathing, circulation. In neonatal resuscitation, we dry, stimulate, and do bulb syringe. So those are kind of the first standard things that we're going to do when a baby comes out. But we've got to dry our newborns immediately after birth. You're going to see this with the baby catcher, the nurse that's assigned to the baby. And when the doctor hands the baby off to them, they're going to have a warm, dry towel, and they're going to immediately start to stimulate and dry the baby. Either right on the mom or underneath the warmer. After a minute or so, they'll throw that wet towel away. They'll throw it down to the ground and grab another dry towel. This is just to reduce the risk of heat loss. And we're going to continue to put any wet towels away and make sure the baby's skin is touching a dry towel. And then radiation, this is loss of body heat to a cool, solid surface in close proximity, but not in direct contact. An example of this would be if you've ever stayed in a cabin or maybe an apartment that was poorly insulated. When it's really cold outside and your bed is pushed right up against the wall, the closer you get to the wall, you can just feel how cold that wall is. So if a newborn is in an isolette with a single wall pushed up to a cold wall, then they're going to be in proximity to that cold wall.
Okay, so what's the question? Blank involves the transfer of heat from one object to another when the two are in direct contact with each other. So that is, I think it's conduction, is it? Okay, I'm still learning this. So it's conduction from object to object. Convection is so they said like a draft over the newborn. Convection, flow of heat from body surface to cooler surrounding air. To that sounds so weird. Anyway,
so that is kind of there. And then thermoregulation. So you'll hear this term a lot. Thermoregulation is the balance between heat loss and heat production. It's primarily through non-shivering thermogenesis, because remember, newborns can't shiver. And then heat loss by the way of 4 mechanisms leading to cold stress, those 4 mechanisms we just talked about. So it's important to kind of be familiar with that. Newborns need a neutral thermal environment which the body temperature is maintained without an increase in metabolic rate or O2. An example of this would be if the baby's too hot or most likely too cold, they may be working hard to breathe and increase their O2 due to it not being a neutral thermal environment. So their metabolic rate's going to increase by trying to maintain their temperature, and that's going to make them lose weight like more quickly or be more hungry or whatnot. It is relatively more common for them to overheat because of their large body surface area as compared to their body weight, their limited insulation, they don't have a lot of fat, and their limited sweating ability.
okay, so last question. The balance between heat loss and heat production is a neonate is called thermoregulation. Oh my gosh, the balance between heat loss and heat production? Thermoregulation? I don't know. That sounds weird to me. Is it correct? Okay. So the balance between heat loss and heat production is in a neonate is termed thermoregulation. Okay.